The internet is full of scary stories of all kinds, but there are always those that keep you up at night and drive you crazy. And today you will see two of the most disturbing stories on the internet. But first, if you're new here, remember to subscribe to the channel. The channel's goal is to get 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I think we can achieve it, so please sign up. Now let's move on to the first story. My father disappeared 11 years ago. I think I know why. My school had a lot of teachers leaving and leaving. This was a common thing in our area. Everyone in my class couldn't wait to be transferred to 9C, especially when Mrs. Smith moved to a new school. Went through every student at Woodridge when they heard that a young teacher was being transferred to take over 9C. Word quickly spread throughout the school about who would be in this teacher's classroom. Jonas and I were selected, as were 15 other students. The day finally came when we were taken to this teacher's classroom. The young man stood near the blackboard, his blonde curly hair and light blue eyes. He was the kind of teacher every girl wanted. All 15 of us staggered to the back of the classroom where he waited for silence. I looked at Jonas, smiling and crossing my fingers that we would sit next to each other this year. We didn't want another repeat of Miss Smith, where we had to learn some sign language to communicate with each other due to being separated so far. The man laughed as silence fell. Then he picked up the small piece of chalk and began writing a name on the board. We all tried to understand what his name said, and until he retreated to his seat, smiling at each of our glances at each other. Mr. Kenji Larson. This was the teacher assigned to take over Class 9C, an English class. The only thing missing now was the seating plan. We've all dreaded sitting next to a person we couldn't stand or didn't want to know about. Mr. Larson then clasped his hands together and said with a soft smile, "Each of you can choose who you want to sit with. My orders." The greatest relief washed over the class as everyone murmured happily and tried to find a seat with their friends or alone. Jonas and I didn't hesitate to sit at the very back of the classroom. I sat in the middle row while he sat next to me. That was the beginning of all the good things Mr. Larson did to make us feel welcome in his classroom. Therefore, each at Woodridge, I had a favorite teacher, and that was him. Unfortunately, none of them were capable of knowing the pure delight we felt when we had English. Mr. Larson was such a charming man that none of us got bored with his long conversations about Shakespeare and Scrooge until that day. It was a casual Wednesday afternoon when I had a double English class with Mr. Larson. It was the end of class, and we were all sitting in our seats when he started babbling about his little study session after school. "Okay, everyone, I want you all to listen. Now, this study session is only for the chosen students that I will call. These are the students who might need some extra help on Romeo and Juliet," Mr. Larson said, looking at each who froze in their seats, not wanting to hear their names being called. You better get your things ready, Elijah. Your name is going to be called." Jonas laughed at me as he smiled proudly. "No, I got a perfect score on that test. I made sure of that." I scoffed back as he sank into his chair in absolute silence as he realized he didn't study like me. "The following students may stand up and line up outside. The rest of you stay seated. I will dismiss you to go home soon," Mr. Larson announced as he picked up a piece of paper, cleared his throat, and began reading. Selena, Charles, Thomas, Owen, Avery, Melinda, Julianne, Benjamin, Cora, Jordan, Christy, Luan, Reese, Efino, Mente, Vincent. Each person stood up from their seats, letting out a small groan and lining up outside. I was instantly stunned to not see Jonas in that line. However, we were soon dismissed to go home. The next day was normal, but other English teachers told us that some of us had been moved to different classrooms. I thought we would all be in the same class. That's a little strange. Maybe Mr. Larson couldn't handle us. Jonas laughed as we looked at the list of names of people who had been moved to another class. That's basically the whole class. I wonder why they were transferred, I said abruptly as I looked at Jonas, who frowned and leaned against the wall. I don't know, but I won't stay in Miss Gellen's room for long. Let's go to English class, he replied, patting me on the shoulder as we walked through the crowd of and teenagers, pushing and screaming, trying to get to first period. We both arrived on time for Mr. Larson's class. The only thing that was wrong was that he didn't do what he always did. "Good morning, class. Ready for English?" Instead, Mr. Larson stood up with his usual small chalk in his hand and looked sternly at each individually, as if checking whether there was hidden. We both rushed to our usual seats as we looked at our new classmates entering our classroom. It was nothing like I had ever seen before. The students who entered Mr. Larson's classroom did not look normal. Each who sat in their assigned seats, depending on where Mr. Larson pointed strictly, did not look attractive. It was as if all the color from his cheeks and body were slowly bleeding, his eyes sunken and little fingers limp. Jonas and I were fixated on these appearances. That's when a loud knock resonated through my skin and everyone was fixated on Mr. Larson. The only thing that was also strange about Mr. Larson was that his once beautiful curly blonde hair was now messy, and the strands appeared to have been cut on purpose. His white shirt and black tie appeared to be torn in places, and some of his shoelaces were missing. In a hoarse voice, he then muttered, "I'll hand you a piece of paper with your name on it. If you lose this role, well, there's no going back for you." Mr. Larson whimpered as he picked up a neatly arranged stack of papers and began handing them out to some of the... Only half the class received this paper. Mr. Larson then walked us with 2 papers in his hand as he shakily placed them on each of our tables. No. With a slight frown, I turned to Jonas, who had the same expression as me. Confusion. Silence settled firmly against the classroom walls. Jonas, with slight horror, was looking at the sheet of paper. Then I looked down, reading the words it said. A list of rules for staying in 9C. Do not be late. If the door is closed, it means you are no longer allowed to enter the classroom and accept the consequences behind it. You will not be saved. Do not look, touch, or interact with the wailing girl. If she bothers you, ignore her. If she yells at you, leave. If she is crying, get as far away from her as possible, no matter what the circumstances. You must bring the following items to class: at least 2 torches, a mirror, and the key to access the back door of the classroom. If you do not bring any of these items to class, you will not be saved. There was a teacher named Mr. Dental come into the classroom and say he will cover the rest of the class, take the key to the back door of the classroom, and go in. Do not hesitate. Don't talk to Mr. Dental. Do not maintain eye contact except through the back door. If the only person going to the back door is you, then you are the only person left alive right now. If you hear the bell ring, don't get up. It's not the sign that really lets you go. I'll tell you when I leave. It may be minutes or hours before you have to wait until class or school is over. It may be night before you can go out. But whatever you do, do not leave this classroom until I order you to do so. Do not speak. The only time you can talk is when I ask you a question. They don't like anyone talking without a... Don't ask me about anything, just the lesson. You can ask me questions when I order. Be safe. Trepidation took over my hands and body, as the only thing that moved slightly were my eyes, which darted from each word consistently. Was this a bad joke? Has Mr. Larson really lost his mind? I slowly raised my head and began to look at Jonas, whose eyes were angrily drawn to Mr. Larson. Before any of us could say a word, the boy in the front row said, "What the hell is that? Rule number 3? Kill the person next to you? Are you fucking crazy?" Silence persisted in the classroom. It was like a cold, dead hand that held the students in place. Nothing in the room moved an inch. The thuds and squeaks resounded throughout the classroom as my ears were brought back from the cold, peaceful moment I had. Nobody moved. Everyone had their eyes on something in front of the classroom. I wasn't sure if it was me going crazy or if it was Mr. Larson, but something wasn't right here. Mr. Larson stood there, his face expressionless. I wanted to scream. I really did. Looking at the various chairs and tables in front of me, my eyes lingered on the head that was face down on the floor. The arms and legs were half bent in unnatural positions, stretched far beyond what any human body could reach. Fluids leaked from each leg and arm, covering the wooden floor with a thick layer of red. David Miller was lying there, her thick black curls dripping the face. Silence. We were quickly interrupted by a weak, trembling voice that instructed us to focus on what we were going to learn that day. The class dragged on, my eyes constantly glancing at the paper and a good classmate who was lying sprawled out at the front of the room. I was practically falling asleep when I first heard this. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, reminding me of the guilt that consumed the only thoughts I had in class. But not. That certainly sounded real. The shrill scream echoed through the halls of Woodridge. I waited, hoping to hear teachers coming out of their classrooms and dealing with the situation, and maybe, just maybe, getting into 9C. But that didn't happen. The bell rang. A slight relief took over the class when we realized that English was over. I glanced quickly at Jonas as I began to stuff my books into my bag. Jonas turned his head to me, his cold eyes staring deeply at me and then at the paper that lay evenly on the table. I felt my legs slide back into the chair when I realized what was happening. The sound of confusion and conversation filled the hallway of the school building. Each teenager appeared to be being dismissed from school. Have they forgotten about us? This allied thought appeared in my mind. All were leaving this school, but not us? Surely all the teachers checked their form records to see that none of us were there. At least half an hour passed. Each new student that was assigned to our classroom left. It was just Jonas, me, Kennedy, Isaac, Dwayne, Harley, and Annie, and of course Mr. Larson. That's when we heard it. It wasn't the same as before, the shrill one. It was like he was in our classroom that minute. The dysphoria held my body in place, my becoming tighter and tighter with each breath. It was louder, getting closer and closer to our classroom until... Ranger. The door slowly opened. A blonde girl entered the classroom. Beautiful, flawless skin and bright green eyes. She was assigned to sit next to me in the middle row. Green eyes stared at me while a dimple formed after his brief smile that lit up the classroom. She placed the bag next to her and lowered her head. Mr. Larson begins to talk tiredly about Romeo and Juliet's past, while a faint sniffle came from the girl. At this point, I was sad that I didn't realize Jonas was sleeping. A faint scream penetrated the room. I quickly looked at the girl who had her head down. The scream filled the dark room. At that moment, Jonas was alerted to the situation. We were both scared, but we remained focused on Mr. Larson's speech, his voice getting louder as the screams did the same. The girl muttered to herself and calmed down. Then she slowly turned to me. Her blonde hair was on either side of her shoulders, his smile and eyes looking into mine. She then whispered, "Can you help me with something?" Every 6 months, Father demands a sacrifice. This time, I was that sacrifice. Can someone help me? I am Vivi. I'm 19 years old and I'm trying to escape my town of New Haven. If any in New Haven see this, can you let me know? I will explain the details at the end of this post, but I want to clarify that I am hiding behind the wall near the exit of the city. If you are an adult and come near me, I will shoot you. I'll start from the beginning. 2 weeks ago, I was living in an apocalyptic world. Ren tasted like chicken. I was told to douse it with barbecue sauce, which made it easier to swallow, but it was still very dry, stringy, and stuck in my teeth. This is the lifestyle I grew up with. I only knew this way of living and surviving. Father told us to treat Ren like food, to let go completely. But I couldn't let go of 18 years with him that easily. I grew up with Ren, freckled cheeks and crooked smiles, Ren. We shared bunk beds, and he used to tell me scary stories to help me sleep. As we grew together, we became closer, and he became the clown of our little group. When morale was low, he was always there to crack a joke and keep a wide smile despite being terrified. I admired your ability to wear a mask and pretend everything was okay, even when we sacrificed our friends. The night before he died, Ren climbed into my bed and told me his theories about his parents. He was sure they were still alive and would find them. That is, when it was safe to return to the surface. Ren didn't remember much about his, but he knew his parents were in the medical field. I found myself wearing his yarn jacket, the one he insisted I keep if he was chosen. He loved that jacket. Apparently his 3-year-old self was in on it when his father found him. Now, Ren was stuck in the back of my throat. I kept chewing, but the more I swallowed, the sicker I felt. I wasn't even hungry, but Father insisted. If we were going to thank him for keeping us safe and away from the surface, we had to obey every order Father gave us. Ren told me not to be upset and not to miss him. I tried not to feel. Dad always said we had to stop eating. That was the only way to enjoy it. But I missed Ren. The empty space next to me felt cavernous and hollow. I missed his head on my shoulder. I missed late-night conversations with him and confessing that maybe I had a crush on him when I was 9. He laughed and said, "Maybe when we're old enough, you can ask me to marry you." I don't think even he realized how powerful his words were. That I would marry him in a heartbeat if we were just normal in a normal world. It wasn't fair that I missed Ren so much. He spat into my bowl and I drained the rest of the water. Disgusting. Jack grumbled from across the table. I shot him a furious look and he stuck out his tongue. Jack was the oldest among us, but you wouldn't think so looking at him. Small and skinny with little, Jack was the definition of squirt. Illuminated by flickering candlelight, the others were eating, their faces cast in an eerie glow as they listened to Father's stories. I knew them all by heart. My father told the same stories since I was. When we were 3 years old, the world ended in what was called the disaster, a terrifying phenomenon that swept the planet, turning adults into savage predators of their own. Nobody knew how it happened. Some people hypothesized that it was bioterrorism, while others insisted that it was natural human evolution. All living beings consumed their young, and now it was humanity's turn. According to Father, who vividly described the horrific experience of devouring his own son, it was a thirst unlike anything he had ever felt before, something he could not control or suppress. It burned logic and love, turning every adult, every parent into a monster of cold and eating. It's not a zombie, my father made a point of adding. Zombies are mindless corpses brought back to life. They are fictional monsters. This was different. Those affected didn't lose their minds. They lost their humanity. My father looked away from us. When I was affected by this phenomenon, my son became like nicotine, stronger than any of the black market. He cleared his throat. There was no right or wrong, no morals in me. I was an animal when I killed him and skinned him, cooking him in a hot stew. His father's smile was sickening. I didn't feel regret or pain. I wanted more. I wanted to feast on him until my stomach was bloated. His voice broke. I killed and ate my son, and I didn't even care. I don't remember my son's name. Whatever that thing was, it took him away. She took away my memories of him, my love for him, my will to protect him, and turned me into a loveless monster. The father sighed. But it didn't end there. When it became known that the meat of it wasn't just a for adults, but also guaranteed youth and immortality when eaten, the planet fell into chaos. The world leaders separated first. Initially, a treaty was made between adults not affected by the phenomenon. The Association of Born, created to protect and save of wild adults. However, there was no association of. Instead of trying to save the governments were consuming them. As the oldest women who survived were taken in and brainwashed, becoming bounty hunters and tasked with hunting us down. Hidden strays that managed to survive being eaten got a nickname. Topics. Apparently, when food it was fibrous and thread-like. The father hid in the basement of the between aces, older survivors who fought, and the wild adults who hunt them like animals. And he took a group of with him. There were 15 of us. Now there are 6 of us. I didn't remember much about my life before the disaster, but I knew I had a mother and a father. One day they walked out the door and left me watching cartoons. Mom told me she would be back soon. In the middle of an episode of SpongeBob, my dad hugged me and carried me out of the house for security. The father admitted that his original intention was to eat. He never tried to sweeten his own desire for meat, and that he was also as monstrous as the adults who hunted us. But the more he was isolated from the surface, the father named each of us. In the beginning, it was to give us an identity so he would feel less guilty about killing and eating us. However, after he gave us the name, the father had to become a real father to prevent us from getting caught, which meant feeding and clothing us, singing lullabies, and spending hours fighting to get us to sleep. I think fatherhood started to hit him. It's not that he wanted to, but he became maternal with us. He began to feel human again, clinging to his food. As we grew up, he taught us everything we needed to know. Teaching basics plus life skills like cooking and typing, but that didn't stop his insatiable hunger, and he promised to keep us safe from the adults in exchange for a small favor. Ren was the last one to continue in our favor. He was almost 6 months old and refrigerated chunks were piled up in my bowl. Maybe that was why I felt so bad and couldn't eat. My father was hungry fresh again. A part of me thought maybe his hunger was gone and I saw him eating rice more often. But after he devastated Ren, I messed up. When father stood up, abruptly abandoning his last story, the others fell silent. Jack and Elsa were talking about a book they were reading, but when father made it clear that he was reaching for playing cards on the small table by the door, they both pulled away, their eyes widening. Alia and Phoebe were already expecting this. Neither of them spoke all day, both ignored their food. When Phoebe started crying, I wanted to comfort her, but what could I say? I didn't want to be sacrificed either. Phoebe, his father's voice was a "Be quiet." I always saw my father as more of a shadow, less of a human. I never saw much of a face or an identity, just the outline of a person. In this case, I was glad I couldn't see the wide smile spreading across his lips, just the slight contortions of his jaw. Suddenly, the room felt too small, claustrophobic, like it was going to swallow me. Our house has always been small, a singular rectangular underground bunker. The place was cramped, with concrete walls absorbing the dim light from lamps, new hanging from the low ceiling. The air was always humid and made my skin feel gross, and it always smelled like sulfur. My father was never specific about what it was or how he got it. He just said it was our home. The bunker was divided into 2 cramped sections. A common area where we ate and did daily activities, a small dormitory with thin, uncomfortable mattresses and a single bunk bed, and a storage room full of supplies my father had gathered over the years. There were no windows, and the heavy, reinforced door was the only connection to the outside world through the underground tunnels. The feeling was very familiar, the feeling of knowing that my time could be up. Jack couldn't sit still, stamping his foot on the floor. Elsa and Cal froze, their expressions hard to read. I never thought what it would be like to be eaten. I used to try to put myself in a chicken's shoes. Dad had a laptop that we had supervised access to. There was no internet, but there was an entire database filled with your own research into this phenomenon. He compared us to chickens, not living beings with thoughts, memories, and families torn from their homes and killed for food. Just like adults did not need native chicken to survive, they wanted this. I wanted this as a... My father held out the playing cards with a reassuring smile that I didn't believe. He wasn't smiling to make us feel better. The father was smiling because he was hungry. Okay, folks, let's play. My father's expression made me feel sick. His tone was enough to make us stand up. Jack jumped first. He was visibly shaking. When Elsa and Cal didn't move, he helped them to their feet as well. I noticed when my father was shuffling the cards, playfully nudging a petrified Jack with his shoulder. He never wanted to save us. In fact, he only kept us alive so he wouldn't feel alone. The 6 of us were silent, with fear written all over our faces, a kind of fear I can't even describe. How can I express this kind of feeling in words? The existential fear of what comes after death and the terror of being eaten. The whirlwind of endless what-ifs and could-have-beens. I could have grown up in a world where I went to school and graduated. I could have had loving parents who supported me. I could have turned 20 and asked Ren to prom and then married me. Something slid up my throat. I could have escaped 2 years ago with Ren when he begged me to go with him. You live. My father's voice brought me out of my thoughts, and I suddenly realized I was wearing my dead best friend's jacket. I could feel my skin crawling, phantom insects filling my mouth. Ren wanted to leave, and I told him we were safe with Father, but that was when we were more numerous and less likely to be chosen. And I wanted to be selfish. I wanted to turn my head and pretend the real monster wasn't right in front of me. Father cleared his throat impatiently, and I squeezed my eyes shut, reached and plucked a letter from the flimsy stack. The rules of the draw were simple, and yet I could barely think straight. All we had to do was not clown around. 6 cards, and among them, a joker. For the unlucky player, they officially offered themselves as to the Father. I was still looking at my own card and clenched it in my fist. I could hear our combined breaths, our screaming pleas to whatever god was listening. Jack drew a queen, his face lit up. He looked like he might say something before stepping back, clearing his throat. Elsa, visibly shaking, drew a 4 of hearts, her hands shaking. Now Cal hesitated for a moment, his eyebrows furrowed in concentration before drawing a 6 of hearts. Alia crossed her arms, exhaled, and drew a king. Phoebe, who looked like she was about to throw up, did as Jack did. Clutching my card in the palm of his hand, he can't breathe. The others were staring at me, and I knew what they were thinking. 6 cards. 6 players, a clown. Suddenly, I wasn't home anymore. I was trapped inside a slaughterhouse, and the walls were closing in. I remembered when Ren drew a joker and I started laughing. He couldn't stop, even when I tried to calm him, tried to wrap my arms around him and tell him everything would be okay. I felt her tears wetting my shoulder and her sobs shaking her, his lips brushing my ear, telling me things that never fully registered. We should have run. His voice dripped with disdain that only really hit me when I was in his shoes. Ren didn't smile at me when he died. He never forgave me. Why don't we run? I couldn't understand why he was laughing, why despite his sunken eyes, he was smiling as if he had won the game. But when I drew that joker myself, I felt hysteria rising in my throat. I laughed. It felt wrong and empty and strange, but it's also good. The concept of being eaten alive suddenly became so ridiculous that I was on my knees, howling in my arms, my body shaking with laughter, something I couldn't control. I tried to stop, tried to stifle my giggles with a hand clamped over my mouth, but they kept coming, hitting me in waves of revulsion. I thought Ren was possessed by the Joker card, but now I understand. I finally understood the feeling of complete despair that invaded him. When I stopped laughing, I had already made my decision. I was going to die with a smile on my face, just like Ren. The others were frowning at me, with confused looks on their faces. "I'm sorry, Vivi," Jack whispered. His expression, however, said, "Sorry, it's you and not me." Alia and Phoebe took a step back as if I were suddenly contagious. Call offered me a small smile, and that was enough. Glad it wasn't regrettable. It was just a smile. With the Joker in hand, I prepared to die. But there is a difference between being brave and being between Ren Samuels and me. I saw him die with his head held high, and I was sure in that disorienting post-reality moment that I could follow in his footsteps. However, my eyes were wandering and my palms were getting clammy. My father was in the corner readying his blade, and knowing it would cut my and I would turn into salted chicken, something in me snapped. I wasn't brave like Ren or Becca or Thomas and Jonas. I was and I wasn't going to die. The world seemed to go into fast. I was that I was squirming. And I had to take 2 breaths, once to get to the door and once as I was turning the handle and opening it. The hunt began as soon as I was catapulted from what I thought was home. There was never a hunt with the others. They gave themselves up. However, they were free hunting. Throwing myself into a race, my mind spinning, I was aware that the others were already on my tail. The rules were simple, just like the card game. Were caught, dragged back, and skinned alive. I had already made my decision, and going back to the bunker was... The father was very strict with his rules. We shouldn't leave the bunker. Adults and brainwashed reformed turned bounty hunters ravaged the underground tunnels, searching for threads. When I managed to enter the tunnels, however, throwing myself into the dark, ankle deep in the sewer, there was no sign of hunters. "You live!" Jack's voice echoed, almost startling me and making me stop in place. "Vivi, come back! It's not safe!" Jack's hesitant steps stopped. I could feel his fear of that single ray of natural light leaking from the surface. Glimpsing a silvery glow in the total darkness, I reached out my hands blindly. Ren's voice was in my head. "I saw them. When I was on watch with Jonas, we saw a staircase, Vivi. We can go up and get out of here." He looked so hopeful, and I had a moment of vulnerability that threatened to bring me to my knees. Grabbing the ladder, I stood up and crawled to the light. A light that was getting brighter, not the kind I was told about. The father said the sky was polluted bright red. He said the sun rose but was blocked, casting an eerie red glow. When the world fell apart, nuclear plants across the planet collapsed, and no one could stop them. However, as I climbed the metal railing, soaking up the glow of the sun, sitting in a perfect crystal blue sky, my father's words suddenly became obsolete. The world wasn't as empty as I initially thought. It was brilliant, colorful. Something flew past me, gases filled my nose, and a guttural scream followed. "Boy, what the fuck are you doing in the middle of the street?" Adult. I ducked and returned to the floor, my body stiffening. The adult's words barely registered in my mind. Was he right? I was kneeling in the middle of a main road full of traffic, with cars. My father told us that vehicles were destroyed by an electromagnetic pulse. "Hey, are you well?" Another voice. This time it was softer. The guy who was hovering over me was a teenager, maybe a year younger than me. He was a thread, but he didn't look like one. The boy's outfit caught me off guard. A white shirt and jeans, a leather jacket thrown over it. His hair wasn't like the boys in the bunker. It was vibrant red and stylized and loose, hanging over friendly brown eyes. In his hand was a rectangular device. Cell phone. My father told us that phones were used as currency in the New World. This guy didn't look like a that she was being hunted, fighting to survive. He looked like a normal college student. His eyes were bright, devoid of the cavernous, empty look I was so used to seeing in others. Even Ren, with his wide smile, failed to hide his true feelings with his eyes. For a moment I was disoriented by the loud, sudden beeps around me and the scorching sun on the back of my neck. The sun should be suffocated by pollution. Clouds should be a fairy tale. Turning my attention to the stranger, I noticed a glaring detail. This boy wasn't malnourished like Jack and Ren. He was eating well. He was alive. Seeing people living their everyday lives and not suffering filled me with happiness, and then despair when I felt the taste of my best friend in my mouth. He was so salty. Suddenly, my body felt like it was falling apart. I was very aware of the world around me, rough concrete scraping my palms and a cool breeze brushing my face. My stomach dropped and I choked on Ren again, and I think I was screaming my ass off, my chest heaving with hysterical sobs, but I couldn't feel or hear anything. I couldn't even taste Ren as he dripped onto my chin. I barely noticed the boy pulling me into the car, his voice a blur of panic. "Fuck, are you okay? Did you just get off the ground?" Oh God, okay, this is bad. Let me take you to the emergency room." When someone across the street shouted if I was okay, I let myself fragment. My father fed me so many lies, lies designed to keep us submissive. The sky was not red. My generation was not being hunted. Adults weren't monsters, and I was safe. Above ground, I was safe. He kept me from the surface with those lies. Ren died for nothing. Pressed against the cold leather of the car seat, curled into myself, I struggled to breathe. As we began to move, reality hit me in convulsive flashes. The world, according to the father, was his creation. "So what's your name?" the boy asked casually. "Do you usually sit in the middle of the street, or is this like a TikTok thing?" The stranger tapped the steering wheel, clearly eager to ask more but sticking to the basics. I couldn't answer. My tongue was twisted and wrong. I pressed my face against the window and watched as life continued outside. I saw a mother with her baby, and tears welled up in my eyes. The boy fumbled with the phone and a song started playing over the speakers I liked. The rhythmic beat pulsed through my skull, driving away my dark thoughts. Under the late afternoon sun, I could finally see the boy's face. He had freckles, just like Ren. Do you, need me to take you home or something? He cleared his throat. Or maybe the sheriff's office. I noticed his sidelong glance, his gaze lingering on the tattered remains of my clothes. Instead of commenting on the red stains on my shirt, he handed me a can. Refrigerator. Real soda. A luxury in the bunker. I had only tried Diet Coke. I drank it quickly. It was fruity, perfect, and refreshing. The guy laughed. Wow, don't drink so fast. I found my voice. Sorry. No, you don't need to apologize. The boy sighed. Where do you live? If you want, I can take you home. I'm Jordan, by the way. You live? His smile was... Although the more I looked at him, the more I could see that frightening blue light passing through his jaw. Vivi. Ooh, nice name, like Nefertari Vivi? He shook his head when I didn't respond, his expression embarrassed. Please tell me you understand the reference. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't cry. The father lied. Above all, relief washed over me. And real. I didn't need to die. My eyes blinked, my head bouncing against the window glass. Outside, the streets were busy. There was everywhere, and my heart was singing. And I was watching a running across the street with his parents as we passed what I assumed was a high school. Empty. Windows were broken and trash covered the campus. Further down the road, however, another high school appeared. There they were, this time visible through imposing metal gates. Hey, can I talk to Blue? Jordan's murmur brought me back to reality. Sir? He sighed. Yes, I have one of them. He sat back in his chair, his seat creaking. Yeah, no, I'm not fucking stupid. 500... He turned his head and I noticed the blue light stuck in his ear blinking. 500 and you tell me where my brother is. We had an agreement. I noticed movement, his head tilting back. No, tell me where Ryan is and it's yours. The 500 means nothing to me, asshole. I think I fell asleep, with my head still pressed against the glass. When I woke up, Jordan was screaming. He was also yelling a little. Oh, come on, I wasn't even going that fast. The sun was gone. The late afternoon bled into twilight. I had never seen the night sky. I had never seen stars, not even a tiny bit of the moon visible on the horizon. There was a figure outside the window, illuminated by spotlights. An adult. I felt myself stiffen before remembering that the adults weren't hunting us. The father was. I was very clear, Jordan. The woman's voice sounded like fingernails on a chalkboard. If I caught you speeding again, I would report you. Yes, miss. Carter. The boy's tone dripped with sarcasm. I am aware that I was possibly speeding, but as you can see, he gestured to me with flailing hands. This girl is clearly distressed, and I'm taking her to the sheriff's office. Jordan took a piece of paper from under the seat. I have a driver's license right here. I can see it. He whistled. All good. Well, I'm going. Mr. Redbird, if you so much as touch that steering wheel, I will report you. But... The woman cleared her throat. I can handle it from here. Jordan's eyes darkened significantly. His smile tightened. I said I understood. Jordan, would you like me to contact your employer? His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. I'm one of the best of them, so no. Hand over the girl and I won't say a word about her speeding. The boy scoffed, and I saw another side of him. He reluctantly reached out and opened my door. She is all yours. To my surprise, he didn't move or speak as the woman gently grabbed my arm. I was gently pulled out of the seat and the door slammed shut. She hadn't finished interrogating him. Are you chewing, Jordan? He shrugged. What? I can't chew and drive? The woman didn't respond, and he let out an exaggerated sigh, opened his mouth, and took out the piece of gum. To my confusion, the girl snatched it from his fingers with a handkerchief. Thanks. He rolled his eyes. You are welcome. Have a good time. A loud bang from behind startled me. Miss Carter gave the boy an accusatory look. Car trouble, Mr. Redbird? Jordan looked at me, a smile tugging at his lips as another unmistakable boom echoed from behind, this time louder. Yes, problem with the car, ma'am. His smile had too many teeth. Have a good night. With a two-fingered salute, he drove away, leaving me with a face full of exhaust fumes. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a comfortable chair in the sheriff's office with a towel wrapped around me. Miss Carter sat across from me, the glow of her laptop screen bathing circles of heavy-looking sleep. She told me to tell her everything, and as I did, babbling my entire life story, the woman stopped to hand me a tissue. I didn't realize I was crying, wiping my nose. Miss Carter was very helpful. She offered me drinks and microwave noodles, and according to her, my age placed me on the threshold of an adult in the city. While they were looking for my parents, they offered me a place at a boarding house for adult orphans. I was halfway through talking to her about Ren when she asked for my tissue. I handed it over, and she offered a new one before jumping to her feet. Miss Carter was kind. I wasn't used to kindness. I'll just process your data into the system, she said. I will be back in a moment. Her words turned my stomach. That's what my mother said before my father took me away from her. Mrs. Carter, she told me to call her Linda, was gone for a while. Her office was cozy, and slumped in my swivel chair, I was tempted to sleep. She left me with a laptop to play with, so the first thing I did was look online. There was no disaster, and like our city, the world continued as normal. I was looking at news articles online when I started to feel nauseous. I wasn't used to normal food. In my search for the bathroom, I found another office. I could see Linda through the window. She had something pressed to her face, and I wondered if she had a nosebleed. But then I saw the creases in the tissue paper, and the realization started to hit me. It was my tissue paper, the one I cleaned my nose and mouth with. I could feel myself slowly pulling away as the woman's eyes rolled back until they were pearly white and her lips parted. The way she moved in erratic jerks made vomit erupt in the back of my mouth. Linda was shaking, holding the handkerchief against her nose and mouth, inhaling me like a... Exactly as Father said. He said we were like one from the black market to them. I only controlled myself when she dropped her handkerchief, reached into her jeans pocket, and took something out. Jordan gum, used. It was sticky, wrapped around his pinched fingers. When Linda put the ball in her mouth, I remembered how to run. When his mouth opened wider and wider, I was already out the door. Turning around, I didn't see any more humans inside the room. Instead, an empty mouth expanded, an inky black darkness chasing me. I got out of there and ran, straight to Jordan. He didn't seem disturbed by my expression. "Let me guess," he said. He was leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed. I had no idea how he had just casually walked into a sheriff's office. Jordan tilted his head, and there it was, that haunted, empty cave in your eyes, the eyes of a thread. "Miss Carter tried to eat you, didn't she?" In a panic, I tried to pass him, but he stepped aside and got in front of me. "I can help you," he said. "I was trying to help you before, but you were kidnapped." Before I could speak, his expression darkened significantly. "You can come with me or become the main dish." His gaze turned to my stain-stained shirt. "It's your choice." I think I would go with Jordan, but then I remembered the banging on his truck, that blue light stuck in his ear. I couldn't trust it. Past him, I ran until I couldn't breathe. For the last few days I have been hiding. I stole a phone from an adult, and luckily he has internet. The same car passes by every day and night, and I know it's Jordan, but he is a thread. Why would he hunt other threads? I can't stop fucking shaking. Father lied to me about everything, but I don't think he was lying about the city. The outside world is normal, clearly, but New Haven is something completely different. I think the adults here are like him, or even worse. So if you're a child in New Haven, please help me. The adults in my town are monsters with human faces. If you are an adult, I have one and I will shoot you. Please do not hurt me. My trainer was not who I thought they were. Last year, I took a job as a night security guard for the local dog shelter. I thought I was doing great until I discovered the truth. My first week was during the day, so I could fill out all the HR paperwork and watch the crappy videos they use to train you. I met with my trainer, Tim, who informed me that he would be working with me overnight the following week. After that week was over and I reversed my sleep schedule, I went to work that Monday and met with Tim. He showed me the shelter, which was huge, but we never went inside. He showed me which keys opened the doors, and where all the security cameras were to make sure you were seen if management decided to see if you were actually patrolling the area. Right behind the shelter was a very large public park. It closes at 10 p.m. and the gates are closed, but that doesn't stop the large number of users and partygoers who sneaked into the park. That was the main reason they had 24/7 security on site. The shelter itself was tightly closed. Many doors and keys were needed to enter the property when everything was closed. The parking lot was closed, and no car could enter without a code. Needless to say, the job was easy. Just walk in circles for 8 hours every night. On my second night before going to work, I got a text from my boss saying that Tim wouldn't be with me and that I would be training with someone else that night. When I got to work, I was alone. So I started just making my rounds. At midnight, I finally met my coach, who told me her name was Dorothy. She was an older, gray-haired woman in her 70s. She told me she had worked there since the county opened the shelter 44 years earlier. She was the original night security guard and told me that I saw her from time to time when she worked during the day, but that she had switched to working only weekends for partial retirement. Dorothy showed me everything. She took me inside the shelter and showed me the aggressive dogs, the friendly dogs, and the puppy area for when I needed a pick-me-up. She showed me which bathrooms were best to use and which ones I should avoid. She had a vast knowledge of the building, how the building had changed over the years as she grew up. She pointed out which areas of the park were the problem areas and even introduced me to some park goers. It was good to know that park goers in the shelter had an understanding. We didn't care if they were in the park, and we didn't call the police as long as they left the shelter alone. She told me how in the past, they used to have inmates volunteer at the shelter during open hours. One of the bathrooms she advised me not to use was where one of the inmates hanged himself. She said she always felt his presence in that area and so avoided it. After that incident, they switched to volunteer prisoners, but there was another incident, and the county quickly shut down the program. After that, I never saw Dorothy again. So, in the last year, I came to work, walked around the shelter, and clocked in. My boss worked 9 to 5, so I never saw him. I would see the same shelter staff leaving when I entered and the openers entering when I left. I also never saw anyone else in the park after Dorothy introduced me to them, which I didn't think twice about until yesterday. I just thought they respected the shelter and stayed away. I had to work a day shift for a week to watch the annual training videos and subscribe to the same nonsense and have my annual review with my boss. Yesterday was my meeting and I discovered some hard truths. I met with my boss and that's how it started. You know, Gavin, I'm so grateful to have someone like you working for us. Last year was difficult for the shelter and I'm glad you were able to take over the reins without a hitch. I know I originally scheduled you to train with Tim, but after he left, I couldn't find anyone to continue your training and you haven't said a word. You came to work every day and I even noticed on cameras that you sometimes walk around the shelter making sure all the doors are locked. No one has done that since, never mind. The point is that you managed to train yourself and I'm very grateful for that. I was all giddy, of course, nothing like being praised for just walking around, doing none. So I said, well, Dorothy managed to show me the mornings before going to the weekends, so I owe her some credit. And it was then that the room fell silent, was cold. The look on my boss's face was pale, jaw dropped, almost shaking with disbelief. I'm sorry, Dorothy, he asked. Yes. Last year I had a night with Tim, but then I spent a couple of weeks with Dorothy, who showed me around. She introduced me to some people in the park and showed me the shelter. I was starting to get confused when the look on his face didn't change. My boss stood up and leaned across his desk. You're kidding me, aren't you? In a very serious tone. I sat there in silence and confusion, mainly because he just swore at me and I was caught off guard. There was a pause and then he sat down again. How do you know about Dorothy? Did you see it on the news? I'm not sure what you're talking about, I replied. Dorothy, the oldest lady who has worked here forever. She showed me around and told me she would work weekends until she retired. I'm sorry, but I avoid the news. I don't have cable or social media, so it's pretty easy, plus it's depressing. He realized I was serious and turned to the computer and started typing. I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm going to open the news article so you can see for yourself. Dorothy was our security for many years, yes, but we have Frank who works weekends. He turned the computer screen to me and I saw the headline. County shelter worker kills 4 people in local park and commits. Was dated the month before I started. I froze and stopped reading. No way, that's not possible. I met her and had intense conversations with her. The police put a total lockdown on the park after that, so you should never see anyone there. Honestly, I think people are scared to go to the park at night after this. Tim left without notice after working that night, and I had no idea why. On the morning of the incident, I was the one who discovered Dorothy's body hanging in the bathroom, so I'm telling you in all honesty, you didn't know Dorothy. I sat there confused, trying to remember those 2 weeks. I continued reading the article and realized it was all true. I never went to the bathroom Dorothy told me about. So the prisoner who hanged himself was true? I asked. What? How do you know that? This was never reported to the media. He was now confused. Dorothy told me about this. I said, wow. That was over 20 years ago and I almost forgot about it. When I first accepted this position 13 years ago, they wanted me to find ways to reduce costs. So I tried to start a volunteer program for inmates. And the prison informed me that we weren't allowed and told me why, but no one knew from that. Dorothy was the one who found him after everyone left for the day, and the bus didn't do the head count correctly when transporting everyone back to the prison. So basically what you're telling me is that I was trained by a ghost? I started laughing in disbelief. I'm not sure it's really hit me yet. After all that, I ended up with a pretty fat raise, and I'll be back for nights next week. And I think I can take a look at that bathroom. My interaction with Dorothy was so real. I have to find her. I have so many questions. I'm a stuntman. For the first time, someone hired me for an adult film. I received this email in the middle of the night with a strange proposal. No one asks how you got the money, however, and once you have the amount in hand, what you did for it completely disappears. The guy who hired me had an independent studio, and I really don't want to know who he sold his productions to. I did not care. Most of my activity consisted of student films and advertisements, so I wasn't exactly making a lot of money. This opportunity, however, yielded $10,000. Their requirements were clear. The lead actors would say their lines, do their thing, whatever, and when they were in the middle of ... it, comma, someone would come in through the back door and kill the man while the woman watched. That was my cue. A fake fight scene would start, and I was supposed to replace the guy getting murdered, taking a few hits, falling, being thrown against the wall, and so on, until he took his place back for a close-up of his face and died. That's what the producer, director, and I negotiated over the phone. When the big day arrived, I went to the studio, his garage, and met the actors. The air was thick with an unsettling sense of anticipation as I entered the dimly lit garage. The walls were lined with various filming equipment, cables snaking across the concrete floor. The smell of old cigarettes and coffee hung in the air, mixing with the faint smell of motor oil. I quickly learned that the woman was the director's wife, which at the time didn't bother me that much. Her on-screen lover would be beaten by a police officer for trespassing and murdered. Then the police officer and the woman fled together. This director-actress couple was definitely weird as hell, but I didn't care. The first few takes were okay. They would catch each other. Mr. Policeman would enter, and then I would change and be killed. Then the woman thanked him for saving her from the boring, and they hung out together. I assumed this was some weird fantasy the couple had. The scene repeated itself, each shot blending into the next. The director's voice echoed commands, his eyes scrutinizing every movement. The actors performed with mechanical precision, their eyes empty of true emotion. It was all just another day at the office. The last take, however, was different. The camera was rolling. After my death, the police officer did not say his usual line. Instead, he leaned in to kiss the woman. The atmosphere changed, a palpable tension seeping into the room. I didn't know they improvised. "Thank you for saving me. It felt like it would never end, and not in a good way," the woman exclaimed, her voice shaking slightly. "Was it your husband?" said the actor police officer, squeezing her hand even tighter. The woman looked confused for a second, then returned to her dramatic character. Why not? He was just an intruder. The policeman took her hand in his. Right, it is common, sleeping with guys who aren't your husbands? She glanced at him, then her eyes darted to the producer. Well, she began laughing nervously. A girl's got to do what she's got to do. Is that what you said to Ronan? Said the producer from behind the camera. When did you meet him? Behind my back. You disappear from the woman's face while the other actor squeezed her hand tighter. I felt like I didn't belong there, and everything suddenly became incredibly real. The air became thick. The realization that this was no longer an act hit me like a punch in the gut. I don't know what you're talking about, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, when the producer approached the camera, the policeman pulled out one of his, and in a split second, my ears exploded. The sound reverberated off the walls, a deafening crack that made my heart race. I covered my head, and when I looked back up, the woman was lying lifeless on the mattress. I think that's it. Thank you for the wonderful work, said the man as the two actors, his lover and the police officer, were wrapping his body around him. And their movements were methodical, almost practiced, as if they had done this before. Then he turned to me. I wouldn't mind if you told someone. I would just blame it on you. See, I draw the line at cheaters. Now leave. He didn't need to tell me twice. My legs move on their own, propelling me out of the garage and into the cool night air. The world outside seemed strangely distant, a stark contrast to the horror I had just witnessed. I knew there was no point in going to the police, so I tried to live a normal life after that. The days that followed seemed to walk in a fog. Every moment was a struggle to maintain a semblance of normalcy as the horrific images played on a loop in my mind. I tried to lose myself in the mundane tasks of everyday life, grocery shopping, cleaning my small apartment, and attending casting calls. But the horrible scene kept coming back, uninvited. Nightmares haunted my sleep, leaving me drenched in sweat and panting. The money, now just a pile of contaminated bills, lay untouched in a drawer. Every time I thought about using it, a wave of nausea would hit me, reminding me of the blood that had been shed by him. Social interactions have become a minefield. Friends and acquaintances noticed the change in me. Their casual questions about my well-being felt like interrogations. I avoided eye contact, afraid they might somehow see the truth in my eyes. The once familiar streets of my neighborhood now felt strange, each shadow a potential threat. I sought solace in alcohol, hoping to numb the relentless anxiety, but it only provided temporary relief. The isolation grew, a cocoon of silence where I could pretend, even if for a moment, that none of this had happened. But the reality was inescapable. I was witness to a crime that went beyond mere murder, and the weight of that knowledge was crushing me inside. Just when I thought I was finally over it, I received another email. I need you for another project. Bring a friend.